How to analyze people at first glance, psychology and body language. Introduction. The power of reading people without them speaking. Imagine walking into a room full of strangers and, with just one look, being able to tell who is extroverted and craves attention, who is reserved but powerful, who is faking confidence, and who simply wants to go unnoticed. This audiobook is an invitation to develop that skill. Not through vague intuition or prejudice, but through structured practical knowledge based on real patterns of human behavior. Analyzing someone at first glance is neither magic nor fortune-telling. It is the art of observing intelligently, interpreting with empathy, and responding wisely. It is about seeing beyond words, recognizing that the body, the face, posture, movements, and even the way someone walks reveal information that they themselves may not be aware of communicating. And you can learn to decode all of it, without anyone having to say a single word. From the moment we are born, we are programmed to observe others. As children, we learn more from what we see than from what we hear. If a mother smiles while scolding, the child remembers the smile, not the scolding. That visual programming persists into adulthood, but most people never train it consciously. This audiobook is your training. You will learn to read what others don't notice. The tension in the shoulders that signals worry, the fleeting gaze that hides discomfort, the forced laugh that masks insecurity, or the steady step that silently screams confidence. Over the next few hours, you will train yourself in the silent language of the human body, a language present in every conversation, meeting, date, sale, or casual interaction. Understanding how to analyze someone at first glance is not about labeling or manipulating. It is about understanding. There is a profound difference between judging and understanding. Judgment comes from ego. That person is arrogant. I don't like his vibe. She seems unpleasant. But when you observe to understand, you can say, that person projects toughness, but maybe they are protecting themselves, or their closed posture indicates they don't feel safe in this environment. Conscious observation gives us a powerful advantage. It allows us to react with accuracy. Instead of clashing with someone because you misinterpreted their attitude, you can connect with what is truly happening inside them. That is the difference between those who react blindly and those who respond with social intelligence. The history behind visual personality analysis has deep roots. For centuries, many cultures have observed the body as a mirror of the soul. In ancient China, doctors studied the face and body to diagnose illnesses long before machines existed. In Greece, Hippocrates spoke about temperaments linked to the body. But it was in the 20th century that this idea took a more structured form, thanks to the work of Elsie Lincoln Benedict and Ralph Payne Benedict, who identified recurring physical patterns associated with specific personality traits. Their studies were not just casual observations, but systematic compilations of real cases. And today, in the 21st century, we can take those principles, combine them with what we know about body language, neuroscience, and psychology, and apply them practically in our daily lives. This knowledge transforms your relationships because it allows you to understand people before they speak. How many times have you wondered if someone was being honest? If the person you just met is trustworthy? If your boss is truly angry or simply has a cold communication style? When you learn to analyze without words, you're no longer guessing. You're interpreting real signals. And when you interpret correctly, you make better decisions. You no longer react emotionally to a closed expression, because you understand that behind it there may be stress, fear, or simply fatigue. And if you understand that, you can adapt the way you interact, generate empathy, and build genuine connections instead of losing opportunities over superficial misunderstandings. This audiobook will not turn you into a mind reader, but it will give you tools to read what most people ignore. You will see how certain people move in patterns, how physical types repeat and come with predictable attitudes, how a relaxed face doesn't always mean calmness, and how a big smile can be a mask to avoid rejection. Everything you will learn here has direct application. At work, to better understand colleagues, clients, or bosses. In your personal life, to connect more deeply with your partner, children, or friends, and even with yourself. Because when you learn to observe others, you inevitably also learn to observe yourself more objectively. Let's start with something simple. The body never lies. It may try to hide, but it always ends up revealing the truth. That's why, when you know what to look for and how to interpret it, you'll notice details that previously went unnoticed. For example, in a conversation, someone may say, "Yes, everything's fine," while their jaw is clenched and shoulders tense. That "everything's fine" is not authentic. Or someone might speak with apparent confidence while nervously playing with their fingers or tapping their foot. Those gestures are not random. The body speaks even when the mouth stays silent. Throughout this audiobook, we will explore many aspects of human analysis, not only personality types and body language, but also how they interact in different contexts. When someone is angry, nervous, excited, or trying to impress, you will see how the same person can behave very differently depending on the environment, and how that reveals deep layers of their mental structure. For instance, someone may appear confident in a business meeting but withdrawn at a family gathering. Those variations are not contradictions, but manifestations of different levels of inner security, social pressure, and need for validation. You will learn to identify those nuances without having to ask a single question. You will also learn to detect early signs of manipulation, hidden aggression, or emotional submission. Not because you should turn into a threat detector, but because understanding these behaviors allows you to protect yourself, guide your relationships better, and respond wisely. Knowing the silent language is like having subtitles in a movie that everyone else is watching without sound. It lets you catch the nuances, anticipate what's coming, and act with emotional advantage. Imagine walking into a negotiation and instantly reading whether the other person feels insecure, dominant, or defensive. That completely changes the game. This audiobook will also show you that this knowledge is not only observed, it can be trained. Analyzing people is not a matter of natural talent, but of focus. It's like learning a language. At first it's confusing, then you start recognizing words, and finally you speak fluently. Here, you will learn to speak the language of the human body. And you'll do it through observation, examples, cases, and real scenarios. You don't need to memorize rules. You just need to train your eye, your presence, and your awareness. Get ready to change the way you see people. From today on, you will stop listening only with your ears. You will start listening with your eyes. Because every human being is speaking, even in silence. And over the next 5 hours, you will learn to understand that wordless language that is everywhere, but only a few truly know how to read. But before we continue, write in the comments which city you're listening from, and if this message resonates with you, subscribe to the channel now. That way, you won't miss any content that nurtures your mind and brings you closer each day to the life you truly deserve. There's no time to waste. Let's continue. Chapter 1. The Psychological Foundations of Human Observation. Every human being carries a story written on their body. The way they walk, the tone in which they speak, the way they sit, how they place their hands, how they respond with a gesture or a micro-movement. All of it reveals something happening inside them. The basis of all visual analysis rests on a profound psychological truth. The body and the mind are not separate. Every thought, emotion, or impulse has a physical manifestation. What happens within is reflected without. This connection is so direct that, in many cases, we can anticipate a person's emotional state even before they speak. For example, someone who has repeatedly experienced shame may tend to hunch slightly, not as a conscious gesture, but as a learned bodily response to protect themselves. Their posture is not just a physical choice, it is the imprint of an internal story. Modern psychology and neuroscience have confirmed what many philosophical traditions intuited centuries ago. The body is an extension of the nervous system. When a person is tense, stressed, or distressed, it's not only their breathing, tone of voice, or gaze that changes. Their posture, their movements, and their energy also transform. And the same occurs in the opposite direction. A person who feels secure, connected, and confident adopts open postures, maintains eye contact, walks fluidly, and takes up space. The bond between body, mind, and personality is not a metaphor. It is a constant feedback loop. That is why we can train ourselves to read this loop from the outside. If we learn to observe attentively and without prejudice, we can interpret with surprising accuracy what is happening inside the person in front of us. Let's take a practical example. Imagine you are at a job interview. There are 3 candidates waiting in the lobby. The first sits rigidly, with a straight but tense back, hands clasped, and jaw clenched. The second is more relaxed, with one leg crossed and an arm resting on the chair, looking at their phone, but scanning the room every 2 minutes. The third leans forward, reading a document, foot tapping constantly. At first glance, They are all waiting, but their bodies are speaking. The first may be trying to control their anxiety. The second wants to project confidence, but is actually hyper-alert. The third is clearly nervous. If you don't know how to read these signals, you'll only see the surface. But if you understand what you're observing, you'll know who is tense, who is faking confidence, and who is simply uncomfortable. These nuances make all the difference in how you interpret the scene and how you relate to it. Posture is one of the most powerful signals we have for analyzing people. Someone who walks with shoulders back, eyes forward, and arms relaxed conveys confidence, but that confidence may be natural or constructed. On the other hand, a hunched posture, head down, and arms close to the body usually signal withdrawal, shyness, or a need for protection. Of course, no gesture or posture should be interpreted in isolation. It is the combination that gives us the real message. That is why visual analysis is not about magical formulas, but about observing patterns, repetitions, and contexts. Biology gives us the structure, but experience shapes behavior. Someone may have a robust build but walk with gentleness. Another may have a fragile appearance yet hold a gaze that is firm and powerful. Learning to see beyond the obvious is what turns a casual observer into a true analyst of human behavior. Another key signal we can observe is muscle tone. You don't need to be a doctor to notice if someone moves with tension or fluidity. The muscles of the face, neck, and hands are especially revealing. Someone who constantly furrows their brow, clenches their jaw, or presses their lips together is showing an internal world under strain. It may be worry, repressed anger, chronic stress, or simply a postural habit forged by years of inner struggle. Small details, like gripping a pen, rubbing the hands, tilting the neck, or keeping the eyebrows raised, are somatic expressions of what is happening within. The body is the canvas on which the mind paints its emotions. So, how can we train our mind to see beyond the obvious? The first step is to learn to look without distraction. We live in a world saturated with stimuli, where people are used to looking without truly observing. Seeing is not the same as looking with intention. To analyze someone at first glance, you need to step out of autopilot and activate conscious attention. This is trained daily. Next time you are in a cafe, on public transport, or in a meeting, pause to observe. Look at people's postures, how they position themselves in space, where their feet point, how they use their hands while speaking. Don't judge, just observe. The more you train your attention, the quicker you'll notice patterns that previously went unnoticed. A second fundamental step is to develop internal neutrality. Analyzing someone is not the same as forming an opinion about them. Most people observe through the lens of ego. I like them, I don't like them, they're strange, they look confident. That perspective blocks real observation. To see clearly, you need to strip away the labels. A hunched posture doesn't mean weakness, it simply means closed body language, which could stem from many causes. An evasive gaze isn't always lying. Sometimes it's shyness or embarrassment. If your mind immediately jumps to a conclusion, you are missing the chance to truly understand. The key is to see without reacting, to observe without the need to interpret instantly. The information you seek is not in a single gesture, but in the sum of all elements that come together in the moment and context. As you progress in this training, you will notice something fascinating. Your perception of the world changes. You will no longer just see bodies walking down the street. You will see stories in motion. You will see the woman walking quickly with her head down and know she is not only in a hurry but likely avoids eye contact due to learned insecurity. You will see the man who smiles a lot but keeps his arms crossed, and understand he is using friendliness as a shield. You will see the person who speaks enthusiastically but whose body retracts, and notice the disconnection between what they say and what they feel. And then, you will be able to interact with them from a much deeper and more authentic level. This chapter does not aim to give you quick formulas. That would be superficial. Its purpose is to change the way you look. Seeing deeply requires practice, patience, and humility. But the benefits are enormous. You can prevent conflicts, improve communication, make better decisions, and connect with others much more effectively. You can notice when someone needs support, even if they don't say it. Or when someone is manipulating, even if their words sound kind. Visual analysis is a powerful tool, but like every powerful tool, it must be used responsibly. Understanding is always stronger than assumption. What you are developing is a new form of intelligence. Observational intelligence. A way of being present in the world without being fooled by appearances, yet without falling into judgment. You will see more, understand more, and act better. Because when you learn to read people, you also learn to read the moment, the context, and the impact you yourself have on others. The intelligent observer does not just analyze. They adapt, improve, and transform their environment through what they see. And that is the true power of learning to analyze people at first glance. Chapter 2. Human Types and Their External Traits. Throughout history, different cultures and disciplines have attempted to classify human beings according to patterns of personality, temperament, or physical structure. Although no classification can fully encompass the complexity of a human being, there are certain typologies that repeat with remarkable precision and that, once understood, offer a useful tool for observing, understanding, and anticipating behaviors. In this chapter, we will delve into the 5 classic human types. 5 predominant forms that combine body structure, vital energy, emotional expression, and behavioral style. Knowing these types does not mean labeling people, but rather learning to identify general tendencies that, combined with context and experience, can reveal fundamental aspects of someone's personality just by observing them for a few minutes. The first step in identifying these types is to develop a global perspective. When you observe a person, don't focus only on their face, or only on how they move or speak. Look at the whole picture: body proportions, energetic presence, pace, tone of voice, posture, facial expressiveness, and manner of interaction. Each human type has a pattern that manifests itself across several areas at once, and once you learn to recognize it, it's as if you've learned to read a new language. It is a visual language that gives you access to what lies beneath the surface. Let us introduce you to these 5 types: the visceral, the muscular, the thoracic, the osseous, and the cerebral. Each one has predominant physical traits, its own way of thinking, feeling, and acting. Some lean toward action, others toward reflection. Some seek emotional connection, others control. Some flow easily, others resist change. And although each person may show a mix of several types, there is usually one that clearly predominates and guides most of their behavior. The visceral type is easily recognizable by their rounded, soft body, with a predominance in the abdominal area. This is a person who seeks sensory pleasure, comfort, and physical well-being. They can often be seen walking without hurry, savoring flavors, aromas, and textures. Their energy is more relaxed, their expression calm. In conversation, they tend to be friendly, approachable, with an easy smile and an open social disposition. However, they may also be someone who avoids conflict and discomfort, even at the cost of authenticity. They prefer the safe and familiar. Notice someone who eats with pleasure, enjoys physical contact, and does not stress easily. You are probably observing a visceral type. Their posture is usually relaxed, their gestures soft, their gaze warm. They are not trying to impress, but rather to feel good. That is their driving force. The muscular type, on the other hand, has an active, firm, proportionate physical presence. They are not necessarily someone who goes to the gym, but their body seems designed for action. They move with determination, speak with energy, and occupy space with natural confidence. They need to do, touch, and solve with their hands. Emotionally, they may be more direct, less introspective. They don't get lost in too much reflection, they act. They like to solve problems, lead, and participate. They often have a well-defined jawline, visible muscles, and a determined gait. In conversation, they maintain eye contact, affirm their ideas with their body as much as with their words. They are often found in practical, athletic, or operational leadership roles. If you notice someone who cannot stay still for long, who offers to help before being asked, and who radiates energy even in silence, you are probably looking at a muscular type. The thoracic type is pure emotion and expression. Their body is lighter, with a broad chest and slimmer limbs. You'll see them talking with their hands, laughing easily, getting excited quickly. This type connects through empathy, enthusiasm, and outward expression. They may be impulsive, hypersensitive, or charming. Their gestures are exaggerated, their voice has inflections, their face is an emotional map in constant motion. They can change moods rapidly and need contact with others to feel fulfilled. Their energy is high, though not always stable. Notice that person who, without you realizing it, makes you like them, draws you in with their enthusiasm, or exhausts you with their intensity. That is the thoracic type. Their deepest need is to be seen, recognized, and felt, and they manifest it constantly through their body language. The osseous type is the complete opposite, withdrawn, with economical movements and a discreet presence. Their body tends to be thin, angular, with prominent bones and little muscle development. They are introspective, reserved, more mental than emotional. They walk quietly, observe without intervening, and speak only when necessary, and with depth. Their posture may seem hunched, not out of insecurity, but because they have no interest in standing out. They live inwardly. Their gaze may be intense but not very expressive. They prefer logic over drama, structure over improvisation. In conversation, they may seem distant, but if you pay attention, you'll discover a complex world behind their silence. They are more often found in technical, intellectual, or artistic fields, where they can delve deeply without exposure. If you see someone who stays on the margins, analyzes before speaking, and doesn't need social approval, you are probably dealing with an osseous type. Finally, the cerebral type is the thinker par excellence. Their body does not follow as clear a physical pattern as the others, but their energy is centered on analysis, strategy, and observation. They are not necessarily introverted, but they are always processing information. Their gaze is attentive, their language precise, their gestures controlled. They notice details others miss and need to understand before acting. They may seem cold or distant, but this is not a lack of empathy, rather a predominance of rational thought. They are the ones who organize, plan, and anticipate. In their body, it is revealed in small gestures, touching their chin, adjusting their glasses, carefully observing before speaking. They are commonly found among researchers, analysts, strategists, programmers, and people whose lives revolve around mental structures. If you see someone who doesn't get carried away by emotion, who asks more questions than they give answers, and who always seems several steps ahead, you are probably looking at a cerebral type. Of course, these 5 categories are not absolute. Many people display combinations. Someone may have the body of a visceral type but express themselves with thoracic energy. Or they may be a cerebral with muscular traits. However, with practice and observation, you can learn to detect which type predominates. This is key, because the dominant type shapes how a person perceives the world, responds to stimuli, and relates to others. Identifying that pattern allows you to adapt your communication, anticipate reactions, and understand behaviors that might otherwise have puzzled you. In everyday life, these observations become extremely useful. Imagine you are a salesperson and you recognize your client as a visceral type. You will not impress them with hard data, but with sensory experiences, comfort, and pleasure. If they are thoracic, they will connect with you if you are expressive, empathetic, and emotional. If they are osseous, they will value your logic, your silence, and your respect for their space. If they are muscular, they will respond to your initiative, dynamism, and action. And if they are cerebral, they will want arguments, structure, and clarity. This understanding gives you an advantage in any human interaction. Not to manipulate, but to connect with what the other truly needs. In the following chapters, we will delve deeper into each of these types, exploring not only how they appear outwardly but also how they think, feel, and act. You will see how these categories manifest themselves in different contexts. At work, in relationships, in situations of stress or joy. And the more you practice this observation, the more natural it will become for you to identify patterns, interpret signals, and adjust your communication to be more effective, more empathetic, and more conscious in every interaction. Because in the end, understanding people begins with knowing how to truly see what you are looking at. And that is a skill that can completely change the way you relate to the world. Chapter 3. The Visceral Type, the Seeker of Pleasure and Security. The visceral type is easily recognizable by their orientation toward physical comfort, immediate sensory gratification, and a constant search for security in all aspects of their life. When you observe them closely, certain physical traits stand out, revealing much more than words ever could. They often have a rounded or soft build, with less defined muscles and a tendency to accumulate fat in areas such as the abdomen and face. This body shape is not only the result of particular genetics, but also a physical manifestation of their mental and emotional orientation toward enjoyment, stability, and emotional nourishment. Their movements tend to be slow, relaxed, and often even indulgent, transmitting either a sense of ease with their surroundings or a need to avoid unnecessary tension. Their body language reflects an openness to human contact, but also a certain passivity when it comes to facing conflict or unfamiliar situations. On an expressive level, the visceral type communicates with a warm, enveloping, and sometimes honeyed tone. It is uncommon to see them upset, although when they feel insecure or challenged, their body language can quickly close off. They avoid direct confrontation and prefer to create harmony around them, which may lead them to yield excessively just to preserve personal well-being. Their gestures reveal an inclination toward the tangible. They touch, they smell, they draw near. Their hands are often active in conversation, but not in an energetic way, rather softly, as if caressing the air. This form of expression is intimately connected with their parasympathetic nervous system, which predominates over the sympathetic, generating a more relaxed and less reactive behavior. In decision-making, this human type tends to avoid risks. They prefer what they already know, what they have tried, and what gives them an immediate sense of security. They do not feel comfortable in uncertain environments or with people who represent sudden changes or unpredictable stimuli. They need to feel they have solid ground beneath their feet, emotionally, economically, and professionally. This need for security does not make them weak, but rather strategic individuals who prioritize stability over adventure. Their way of thinking is usually more concrete than abstract, and their conversations revolve around familiar, practical, and everyday topics. They are not fond of philosophical or theoretical debates, and if they engage in them, it is from an emotional or personal perspective, not a cold analytical one. In interpersonal relationships, the visceral type tends to be extremely loyal. Once they feel comfortable with someone, they develop a strong need to maintain that bond. Rejection or abandonment hurts them deeply, which is why they are capable of acting with docility or adaptability, even in situations that do not benefit them, just to avoid losing the connection. They are people who enjoy physical contact, shared meals, domestic routines, and explicit displays of affection. Their emotional intelligence should not be underestimated, as they are experts at picking up on the emotional state of those around them, even if they do not always have the tools to respond assertively. It is also common to see in them a tendency toward emotional dependency, especially if they have not developed a solid self-image that makes them feel valuable on their own. One of the greatest strengths of this human type is their ability to create warm, welcoming, and affectionate environments. Wherever they are, there is usually a sense of containment, calm, and belonging. They are excellent hosts, reliable co-workers, and fundamental members of any group that values harmony. They do not seek the spotlight, but they do need emotional recognition. They deeply enjoy simple pleasures, a homemade meal, a quiet afternoon, an intimate conversation. This ability to find satisfaction in everyday life makes them an emotional anchor for many. However, their weak point emerges when this search for security leads them to avoid necessary changes, deny important conflicts, or remain in comfort zones that prevent them from growing. They may fall into procrastination, conformism, or emotional dependence that leaves them vulnerable to manipulative people. In the workplace, the visceral type tends to seek professions where the environment is stable, schedules are predictable, and tasks are routine. They are not drawn to constant pressure or highly competitive settings. They thrive in service jobs, administrative roles, or functions where they can help others without being exposed to high emotional demands. If not properly guided, they may fall into passivity or stagnation, but with the right direction, they can become dedicated, patient, and extremely loyal workers. They also have a good ability to resolve conflicts with a conciliatory attitude, as long as they do not feel forced to change their essence. A daily example of this type might be that person at a family gathering who makes sure everyone is comfortable, that food is served, and that the atmosphere is cozy. They may not talk much, but their presence radiates warmth. At work, they are that colleague who never argues, always smiles, and prefers doing things the same way because they've always worked that way. In relationships, they are often that partner who gives themselves completely, who needs constant affection, and who deeply fears losing the bond, sometimes to the point of forgetting themselves. To understand the visceral type is to understand the importance of emotional connection, secure attachment, healthy pleasure, and routine as a structure of containment. It is not about labeling people, but about understanding how this pattern can manifest in different degrees and forms. In some people it is evident. In others, only a part of their personality responds to this archetype. What matters is recognizing that each gesture, each pause, each way of moving, and each everyday choice reveals much about what that person values, needs, and fears. When you learn to identify the visceral type, you can anticipate their needs, avoid unnecessary conflicts, and offer the kind of communication that truly connects. For example, if you wish to influence a person with this profile, do not do it through pressure or urgency. Present things to them as improvements in their well-being, as more comfortable options, or as ways to preserve what they already love. In persuasion, this knowledge allows you to use a more emotional, gentle, and practically oriented language. In negotiation, you will know that their greatest fear is losing what they already have, so you can frame your proposal around ensuring stability, continuity, or an improvement in quality of life. The analysis of this human type is not a tool for manipulation, but a compass for understanding, empathizing, and connecting authentically. When you observe a visceral person, you can see beyond their kind smile or protective silence. You can read in their body and gestures what they will not say in words, their deepest desires, their hidden wounds, and their unique way of experiencing life. That is the richness of learning to analyze people at a glance. It is a powerful, practical, and profoundly human skill. Chapter 4. The Muscular Type, the Doer of the Physical World. The muscular type is, by definition, the archetype of the doer. This is the individual who seems to have been born to build, to execute, to materialize abstract ideas into concrete realities. Their world is not made of assumptions or philosophical speculations. It is made of things that can be touched, moved, and constructed. That is why when you encounter a person with a predominant muscular nature, the first thing you notice is not their speech, nor even their emotional attitude, but their physical presence. Firm, structured, defined. This type of person seems to inhabit their body more fully than others. They walk with a strong step, back straight, shoulders slightly back, as if the world belonged to them through the strength of their will embodied in their body. They are not necessarily large in size, but their posture, energy, and way of moving reveal a very close relationship with the physical plane. From a physiological point of view, the muscular type is distinguished by a well-proportioned body, broad shoulders, strong limbs, a defined jawline, and a firm neck. Muscles are their hallmark, whether or not they engage in physical exercise. Even those who never set foot in a gym display greater baseline muscle tone than other types, which gives them a solid, reliable, grounded air. Their chest is usually expanded, their abdomen active, and their movements follow a clear pattern, intention followed by execution. In other words, they think and they act. And they do so directly, without unnecessary detours, because their mind works in rhythm with what they can create, repair, or improve. Their body is their tool, and their mind is in service of concrete goals. At the level of body language, the muscular type conveys decisiveness. They are not necessarily the fastest or the most expressive, but they are the most action-oriented. Their hands are often in motion, carrying, fixing, holding, manipulating. It is common to see them busy, even when they have no explicit tasks at hand. Their energy drives them to stay in motion, not out of anxiety, but because their inner well-being is closely tied to their ability to actively intervene in their environment. They do not feel good unless they are doing something useful, productive, or tangible. They speak with the same strength with which they move. Their voice tends to be firm, medium to loud in volume, stable in tone, with few emotional inflections. They are not particularly theatrical in speech, but they are forceful. When something bothers them, they do not hide it. When something excites them, they say it clearly. And when something lacks practical sense, they dismiss it without much reflection. Emotionally, the muscular type has a direct connection between feeling and acting. They do not get lost in circular thoughts, nor do they become trapped in doubt. If something bothers them, they confront it. If something pleases them, they pursue it. If something worries them, they solve it. This ability to move from feeling to action without blocking themselves is one of their greatest strengths. They are not especially introspective nor subtle in emotional sensitivity, but their loyalty, commitment, and sense of duty are deeply solid. They are people who value effort, who respect discipline, and who expect the same from others. For them, words matter less than actions. You can promise much, but if you do not deliver, you lose their trust. In personal relationships, the muscular type tends to be protective, structured, and, in some cases, somewhat dominant. Not because they want to impose, but because their way of loving is expressed through caring, organizing, leading. They need to feel that they contribute something useful, and if that means carrying someone else's weight, putting order where there is disorder, or taking charge of important decisions, they will gladly do so. But they also expect reciprocity, respect, action, loyalty. They do not easily tolerate passivity in those around them. Evasive attitudes, indecision, or excessive theory without application irritate them. They like to surround themselves with practical, strong, and committed people. And although they do not always say it, they deeply value admiration. Knowing that others recognize their ability to solve, build, or lead nourishes them internally. At work, the muscular type is the engine of execution. Whether as a worker, project manager, builder, athlete, or military leader, their strength lies in turning objectives into results. They are perseverant, methodical, resilient. They do not fear effort or fatigue. In fact, they feel most alive when the challenge demands more from their body and will. They have high tolerance for physical pain, and many times they refuse to stop or rest out of fear of appearing weak. This, in some cases, can lead them to extremes of exhaustion, excessive responsibility, or self-rejection when they do not achieve their goals. Because although they do not say it openly, the muscular type is profoundly demanding of themselves. Their self-worth is anchored in their ability to achieve, to produce, to make an impact through deeds. When they feel they are not doing enough, they judge themselves harshly. One of the greatest challenges for the muscular type is learning to stop, to observe themselves, to nourish their inner world as well. Because in being so outwardly oriented toward doing, they sometimes forget that they also need to rest, to feel, to process. It is common for their emotions to be relegated to the background, which in the long run can generate blockages, tensions, or even physical illness. The muscular body speaks when the soul has not been heard. And it is there where they need to learn balance, to continue being a doer, but also to be a complete human being, with the right to feel, to fail, to rest. When interacting with a muscular type person, the most effective way is to go straight to the point. Be direct, clear, structured. Do not beat around the bush, and above all, do not attempt to manipulate them with emotional ambiguities. Earn their respect by showing consistency between what you say and what you do. If you say you will arrive at 8, arrive at 8. If you commit to a task, fulfill it. For this personality type, trust is built on actions, not speeches. And once you earn it, you will have at your side a firm, loyal person, willing to support you with all their strength. An everyday example of the muscular type can be seen in the worker who leads a construction team, in the sports coach who demands maximum effort but leads from the front, in the father who works long hours but comes home with the groceries and makes sure everything runs smoothly. It can also be seen in the mother who organizes everything, carries her children without complaint, fixes the bike or changes the light bulb without needing to ask for help. These are people who understand life as a responsibility that must be faced with strength. They do not ask for permission, they do not wait for ideal conditions. They simply act. But behind that visible strength, there is also a heart that often needs rest, recognition, and emotional connection. They may not ask for it in words, but they need it. And when they receive it, when someone sees them beyond their productive capacity, the muscular type softens, becoming even more human. Because beneath every muscle, there is also a story that deserves to be heard. This knowledge allows us not only to identify this type in the world around us, but also to adjust the way we communicate, lead, and live together. Knowing that someone is muscular does not mean labeling them, but rather understanding their way of processing reality. And from that understanding, we can improve our relationships, our decisions, and our empathy. Because reading a person is not judging them. It is discovering the map of their soul through the body they inhabit. And in the case of the muscular type, that body is their greatest declaration of intent. Their language is action. And if we learn to read it, we also learn to communicate with greater precision, respect, and effectiveness. Chapter 5. The Thoracic Type, the Emotional Expressive. The thoracic type is, without a doubt, one of the most striking and easiest to recognize, but also one of the most complex to interpret without the right preparation. Their body tends to be more dynamic than other types. not necessarily because of strength or physical structure, but because of the way they express themselves. The chest is usually projected forward, almost like a bodily declaration of openness, of presence in the world. This has not only biomechanical implications but also psychological ones. A projected chest indicates a desire for emotional connection, a tendency to live from the heart, from feelings. This bodily presentation is accompanied by expansive gestures, a voice that easily fluctuates in tone, and an energy that seems to move with the rhythm of the conversation itself. For those who observe carefully, it is easy to notice that the thoracic rarely maintains a neutral posture for long. Their body is an extension of what they feel and think. The thoracic has a strong need for attention, validation, and emotional connection. This does not mean that they are egocentric in a negative sense, but rather that they seek to be seen and felt by others. It is an emotional need that stems from a genuine desire to belong, to create meaningful bonds. Their social energy is usually high, expressed in the desire to share, talk, touch, hug, laugh, and even cry in company. This emotional expressiveness makes them charismatic, attractive in social contexts, and especially convincing when they need to persuade or influence. However, it also makes them vulnerable to fluctuating emotional states, where lack of attention or criticism can be interpreted as a deep personal wound. The thoracic needs to feel accepted for what they express, not just for what they do. One of the most interesting traits of this type is their almost instant emotional responsiveness. While other types may hide or rationalize what they feel, the thoracic manifests it through the body without filters. Their gestures are a direct window into their inner world. If they feel excited, their eyes shine, their posture lifts, their movements quicken. If they feel hurt or insecure, their chest may sink slightly, their voice tremble, and their gaze wander. This body language, if properly read, offers invaluable information about their emotional state, intentions, and even their degree of sincerity. In conversation, for instance, it is common for them to accompany their words with deep eye contact, broad hand gestures, and even forward-leaning inclinations that reveal interest and empathy. When it comes to communication, the thoracic expresses themselves with enveloping warmth. Their tone of voice is modulating, able to rise and fall to capture the listener's attention. They use dramatic pauses, silences that speak for themselves, and a cadence that reflects their inner emotions. This musicality makes them ideal for professions or roles where emotional connection is essential. Teachers, actors, therapists, speakers, salespeople, artists. They do not just communicate words. They transmit feelings. The listener not only understands what is being said, but also feels what is being expressed. This quality, however, also exposes them to emotional manipulation if they have not developed sufficient emotional intelligence or self-control. From a psychological standpoint, the thoracic tends to think in emotional rather than rational terms. Their first response to a situation is usually not logical but affective. How does this make me feel? How does it affect others? This pattern can make them empathetic and compassionate, but also impulsive when emotions dominate their judgment. The emotional intensity with which they live can lead them to act before thinking, which can bring both opportunities and conflicts. In high-pressure environments or situations of interpersonal tension, their need for emotional harmony can become a weakness if they do not know how to handle disagreements or constructive criticism. For this reason, developing emotional self-regulation skills is key to the thoracic's balance. To connect with a thoracic, the key lies in validating their emotions, showing genuine interest in what they feel, and using warm body language. It is not just about listening to their words, but recognizing the emotion that accompanies them. An empathetic look, a sincere nod, a warm tone of voice can open the doors to their trust. On the other hand, if they perceive indifference, coldness, or tactless criticism, the thoracic may quickly shut down, feeling rejected or unvalued. At the same time, it is important to remember that their emotional expressiveness does not always equal emotional depth. At times, they may exaggerate reactions or dramatize situations, not as conscious manipulation, but rather as a natural way of experiencing life with intensity. In relationships, the thoracic tends to seek close, intimate, and emotionally meaningful bonds. They are not comfortable in superficial or distant connections. They need to feel loved, recognized, appreciated for who they are, not just for what they do. This need can create deep bonds, but also a certain emotional dependence if a solid sense of independent self-esteem is not cultivated. When they feel secure and valued, the thoracic flourishes as a deeply generous human being, willing to give, support, encourage, and accompany. Their emotional energy is contagious and often elevates the mood of those around them. But if they feel ignored, they may become unstable, anxious, or even dramatic, seeking emotional reactions to compensate for their sense of inner emptiness. Ultimately, understanding the thoracic requires sensitivity and attentive observation. It is not enough to watch their posture or gestures. One must feel with them, connect with their expressive humanity. Their body does not lie, but it does exaggerate. Their words are not always precise, but their tone reveals more than their content. By training the eye to decipher their signals, one gains deeper insight into human behavior, beyond the rational. At heart, the thoracic reminds us that emotions are not a luxury of existence, but a compass that guides our decisions, relationships, and sense of belonging. Whoever learns to read them also learns to read the warmest, most unpredictable, and profoundly human dimension of the soul. Chapter 6. The Osseous Type, the Reflective Introvert. The osseous type is perhaps the most enigmatic and difficult to read at first glance, precisely because their energy flows inward, rather than outward as with other human types. However, their body speaks on a subtler frequency, revealing an intense, structured, and reflective inner world with a profound inner life. The osseous build tends to be slender, with prominent bones, an angular face, narrow shoulders, long limbs, and sometimes a certain bodily stiffness. Their posture may appear withdrawn, with a sunken chest or head slightly tilted downward, as if avoiding being seen or more absorbed in thought than in the immediate surroundings. This physical disposition reflects their preference for introspection, observing before acting, analyzing before judging, and diving into their inner world before opening up to the outer one. The behavior of this type is usually reserved, cautious, with measured and quiet movements, never wasted. There are no unnecessary gestures, no exaggerated laughter, no impulsive outbursts. On the contrary, what can be perceived in them is an emotional economy that is not coldness but rather control and depth. Their gaze is penetrating, direct, and at the same time distant, as if analyzing everything and everyone before allowing entry into their private sphere. Those who learn to observe the osseous type must understand that their pauses, silences, and restrained body language do not signify indifference, but, quite the opposite, an intense mental activity that manifests in rhythms different from emotional immediacy. It is not unusual for this type to prefer sitting apart, seeking moments of solitude to recharge, or appearing uncomfortable in highly demanding social settings. They are more reader than speaker, more observer than actor, more thinker than immediate doer. In their body language, what stands out is a firm but discreet posture. Their back may be straight, but without the martial emphasis of a muscular type. Their hands say little, but when they do, they are precise. It is common for them to cross their arms or place their hands behind their back, which can be interpreted as a sign of self-observation rather than emotional blocking. Their tone of voice is generally low, measured, with a cadence that conveys deep thought rather than emotional intent to persuade or conquer. Every word seems carefully chosen, every phrase carries reflective weight, and every pause is part of the message. These patterns are easy to overlook for the untrained eye, but highly revealing for those who learn to read the subtle language of introspection. In interaction with their environment, the osseous type tends to be prudent. They observe more than they speak, listen more than they reply, and respond more with minimal gestures than with grand expressions. They may seem distant or even cold, but those who take the time to know them discover a deeply loyal, analytical human being with an emotional intelligence that does not manifest in visible enthusiasm but rather in precise observations and quiet support. This is the kind of person who does not interrupt, who prefers to think during a conversation rather than compete for a turn to speak, and who often adds value not through the quantity of words but through the quality of their analysis. The key to understanding this type is realizing that their energy does not seek to please or impress, but to comprehend, to go deeper, and to establish authentic bonds, even if they are few. One of the most visible signs of their inner world lies in their gaze. It is not evasive, as some might think, but rather a gaze that scans, penetrates, and evaluates the depth of a conversation or the coherence between what someone says and what their body reveals. They may hold eye contact for a few exact seconds, then lower their eyes to continue processing, only to return with a well-formed opinion. It also manifests in their breathing, which is usually slow, measured, as if every inhalation served to calm and every exhalation carried an idea outward. These small signs reveal their constant self-observation, inner discipline, and effort not to let emotions dominate them, even though those emotions exist intensely within. Relating to the osseous type requires patience, respect for their space, and communication without pressure. They cannot be forced to talk about themselves, to trust quickly, or to engage in emotional dynamics that do not resonate with their need for structure. But once their trust is earned, the bond is deep, lasting, and full of value. They know how to listen without judging, advise without imposing, and be present without needing to shine. They are companions who bring balance in moments of chaos, reflection in times of impulse, and stability in the midst of emotional noise. For the trained observer, the richness of the osseous type lies in all that they keep unspoken, in all that they think, and in all that they reveal through small gestures from their inner universe. This type is not easily manipulated, for their critical sense protects them from falling into emotional traps. Nor are they naive, although they may seem so due to their apparent social detachment. In reality, their apparent passivity is a conscious choice of observation and strategy. Even when they seem absent, they are listening to everything, analyzing contexts, and forming conclusions. This is why those who learn to read the osseous type gain a powerful advantage. They understand the mental movements that are not expressed, the silences that hold meaning, and the pauses that contain messages. In many ways, they are the archetype of the silent sage, the strategist who does not need to speak to communicate, nor act to command respect. Ultimately, the osseous type is a living reminder that the essential is not always visible at first glance. Their body speaks in codes that require patience and attention, but once deciphered, they offer a deep understanding of human behavior beyond the surface. The art of analyzing people finds in this type both a challenge and a reward, for it forces us to sharpen perception, to respect another's timing, and to value the richness of what is unspoken. Their discreet presence conceals a vast inner world, and their body language is a subtle map leading to an understanding of the most introspective and silent aspects of the human soul. Chapter 7. The Cerebral Type, the Analytical Observer. The cerebral type represents the culmination of analysis, introspection, and the constant elaboration of ideas that are rarely spoken aloud. These are people who live more in their minds than in the physical world, silently observing, processing, and deducing everything happening around them. From the very first eye contact, they usually convey a sense of distance or reserve, as if they were calibrating their environment before allowing any kind of openness. Their face typically remains neutral, with few large or explosive gestures. Instead, what stands out are their microexpressions, subtle eye movements that examine with precision, a slight furrow of the brow that signals concentration, or a slow blink that reveals a thought process unfolding. Unlike more visceral or emotional types, the cerebral type does not immediately seek emotional connections. First they analyze, evaluate, and classify. Their body tends to adopt a withdrawn posture, with shoulders slightly sloping forward, as if physically protecting their mental center. This is not always shyness, but rather an inner priority, thought first, action later. Many of these individuals walk at a steady pace, neither hurried nor distracted. Their focus rests more on their ideas than on social interaction. They are deeply independent, both in thought and in action. They are not interested in external validation or in being the center of attention, which is why they often go unnoticed in large groups while silently observing everything around them. One of the most effective ways to recognize a cerebral type is by noticing how they respond to their surroundings. They don't react immediately. Their responses are measured, often deliberate, and always logical. They tend to ask questions more than make statements, not because they doubt themselves, but because they want to explore every angle before forming an opinion. When they speak, they do so with precision, carefully choosing each word, avoiding exaggerations or unnecessary declarations. Their tone of voice carries a steady calmness, sometimes monotonous, but always aligned with their worldview. They don't need to raise their voice to be heard. Their authority comes from substance, not volume. Although they may seem cold at first, these individuals conceal a deep emotional world, but one that is highly structured. Unlike the thoracic type who expresses emotions with intensity, the cerebral type categorizes and analyzes them, only expressing them if deemed necessary. This is why connecting with them requires patience, respect, and a genuine willingness to listen in their language. Trying to force emotional openness will be perceived as an invasion and will only cause them to withdraw further. In contrast, when given a space of trust without pressure, they can slowly open up and share surprisingly profound thoughts. They are excellent at giving advice, as their perspective is usually free from immediate judgment. They see patterns, interpret behaviors, and can help others find clarity where emotions create fog. In professional or problem-solving settings, the cerebral type stands out for their capacity to synthesize. They don't get lost on the surface of things but go straight to the core of the matter. They prefer calm environments with controlled stimuli, since excessive noise or distractions are draining for them. They work well alone or with people who respect their need for reflection. They are not charismatic leaders or figures seeking the spotlight, but in situations requiring deep analysis, uncompromising logic, and strategic thinking, they are irreplaceable. They are also the most likely to spot mistakes others overlook, precisely because of their habit of observing closely and taking nothing for granted. To relate effectively with someone of this type, the first step is learning to respect their silences. Not every pause means coldness. Many times, they are simply processing what you said, and their response will carry a depth few can match. It is also essential not to mistake their lack of expressiveness for disinterest. In fact, the cerebral type is often more present than they appear. They simply don't feel the need to manifest it through broad gestures. Questions like, "What do you think about this?" open doors, while remarks like, "Why don't you say anything?" close them. This type flourishes when given freedom to think, not when pressured to respond. As for their habits, they usually have well-established mental routines. They enjoy reading, researching, and connecting seemingly unrelated ideas. They are stimulated by the abstract, by complex knowledge, and by anything that allows them to go beneath the surface. Many of them find pleasure in technical details, structured systems, and conceptual frameworks. They are fascinated by understanding how things work, but even more so why they work that way. This constant search for meaning is what drives them internally. It's what gives their life purpose. However, they also face certain challenges. They can become trapped in excessive analysis, paralyzed when it comes to making decisions. They tend to postpone actions, waiting for the perfect moment or the flawless plan. They may also come across as cold or inaccessible to those seeking a more emotional or spontaneous interaction. In personal relationships, they require time to build intimacy, but once they do, they are loyal and committed. Their inner world is so vast that they sometimes struggle to put it into simple words, which is why patience from those around them is vital. Reading this type of person is not an easy task, but once you understand their rhythm, their language, and their energy, you discover one of the richest and deepest personalities there are. To understand a cerebral type is to understand that silence also communicates, that the mind can be a powerful refuge, and that often the people who speak the least are the ones who observe the most, understand the most, and have the most to contribute. They are not here to impress with empty words, but to build, step by step, a clearer and more precise understanding of the world and of human beings. Chapter 8. Body Language. What the Body Always Says. The human body is a channel of communication that cannot be silenced. Even when we don't say a single word, our body is constantly speaking. Body language is the silent expression of what happens within us, often more honest and revealing than any verbal speech. Through gestures, postures, movements, tension, or relaxation, we emit signals that others perceive, often at a subconscious level, that directly influence how we are interpreted. Being able to correctly read body language is therefore a fundamental skill to decipher human behavior. The smallest gestures, such as crossing arms, tilting the head, or the direction of the feet, contain clues about a person's emotional state, openness or rejection, confidence or nervousness. They are silent codes that, once understood, allow us to see beyond words. One of the first elements we should observe when analyzing body language is the set of gestures that reveal intention, emotion, and the level of energy a person is experiencing at that moment. For example, a genuine smile that engages the muscles around the eyes, known as the Duchenne smile, indicates an authentic emotion of joy or pleasure. In contrast, a smile that appears only on the lips and doesn't reach the eyes is usually a social signal, a learned gesture to meet expectations, but not necessarily sincere. The same applies to eye contact. A steady, sustained gaze can denote confidence and connection, while eyes that avoid direct contact or repeatedly glance to the sides may indicate discomfort, distraction, or even deception, depending on the context and the rest of the accompanying nonverbal cues. Crossed arms are a classic gesture that can have multiple interpretations. In tense conversations, it may reflect a defensive attitude or an emotional barrier. However, for some people, it can simply be a resting or comfortable position. That's why a single gesture cannot be interpreted in isolation, nor without considering the rest of the individual's behavior. The same is true with the hands. Open, visible hands are often a sign of honesty and willingness to cooperate. When hands are hidden, rigid, or rubbing against each other, they may denote nervousness, insecurity, or reserve. Hands placed behind the back are often observed in figures of authority or people seeking to project control, but they can also be a way of containing anxiety. Feet, in turn, are among the most honest indicators of body language, precisely because most people are unaware of their position. In a conversation, if someone's feet point directly toward you, it indicates interest and attention. But if they are turned toward an exit or in the opposite direction, it could be a sign of wanting to end the interaction or that their mind is elsewhere. The back and overall posture also provide vital information. An upright, firm posture conveys presence, self-confidence, and openness, while a slouched posture is often associated with insecurity, emotional burden, or disconnection. But the most interesting insights arise when we contrast overall posture with the face. If someone has a smile but their posture is slumped and their shoulders droop, that smile may be masking discomfort, sadness, or frustration. This type of incongruence between nonverbal channels is one of the most powerful signals for detecting hidden emotions or internal tensions. The alignment between body language and verbal message is key to assessing authenticity. When both are aligned, the message feels credible. But when the body contradicts the words, the body is usually the one telling the truth. In interpersonal space, distance and body orientation are also fundamental indicators. Every culture has its own norms about comfortable personal space, but in general, when someone moves closer than usual, they may be seeking connection, intimacy, or exerting pressure. Conversely, if a person keeps a large distance or steps back while communicating, they are likely trying to preserve their emotional or physical space. Torso orientation also speaks volumes. If someone faces you directly, they are giving you attention and openness. If they turn sideways or angle their body away, there is an emotional withdrawal at play, even if their words don't reveal it. Body orientation is often more honest than the face, which is frequently trained to conceal. The use of space also reveals power or submission. When someone expands into their surroundings, places objects around them, occupies more space than necessary, or leans back without inhibition, they are demonstrating control or dominance. In contrast, those who shrink their body, sit on the edge of a chair, or keep their belongings close are in a state of reserve or perceived hierarchical inferiority. These patterns are especially evident in group settings, where body language marks dynamics of leadership, influence, or exclusion. Repetitive or automatic gestures, such as touching the hair, adjusting clothing, or rubbing the neck, are often signs of internal tension, anxiety, or discomfort with what is being said or experienced. In people under high emotional strain, these gestures intensify. However, one of the most common mistakes in interpreting nonverbal communication is doing so literally or in isolation. There is no single universal meaning for a gesture, because the body speaks as a whole and within context. Reading a gesture without considering the surrounding circumstances, the individual's personality, or the emotional situation can lead to inaccurate, or even unfair, interpretations. Another mistake is projecting our own fears or beliefs onto someone else's body, seeing rejection or threat signals where none exist. To avoid these errors, it is essential to observe patterns, not isolated moments. That is, we must pay attention to how someone usually behaves and what variations appear under certain stimuli. This is how a deep, nuanced reading is built, based on consistency rather than quick assumptions. Learning to decipher body language takes time, observation, and empathy. It is as much an art as it is a science. It's not about turning ourselves into judges of others' bodies, but into respectful interpreters who seek to understand beyond words. When we achieve this, we open the door to authentic communication, more conscious relationships, and a social intelligence that goes beyond the superficial. The body, after all, does not lie. We just have to learn to listen to it carefully. In the next chapter, we will delve into how the eyes, blinking, pupils, and visual silences are also powerful channels to understand another's inner world, and to project our own with intention. Chapter 9. The Human Face, the Map of Emotions. The human face is a masterpiece of emotional expression. Every muscle, every crease, every fleeting movement has the power to reveal inner thoughts, deep feelings, and even hidden intentions. The face is the canvas where emotions are painted before they can be translated into words. No matter how controlled a person may be, At some point their face will betray their inner world, even if only for a fraction of a second. And it is precisely in that fraction where the power of the trained observer lies. Understanding this emotional map requires almost surgical attention to detail. The arching of the eyebrows, the type of smile, the intensity and direction of the gaze, the tension of the jaw, or the breath escaping through the lips. Everything speaks. Everything communicates. The eyes, for instance, are called the mirror of the soul for a reason. They reflect fear, desire, sadness, enthusiasm, or detachment with only the slightest variation in openness, blinking, or focus. Direct eye contact can signal confidence or challenge. An evasive glance may indicate discomfort, guilt, or internal processing. The sparkle in someone's eyes betrays vivid emotion, while dullness reveals emotional exhaustion. The direction in which someone looks while thinking can show whether they are accessing a visual memory, an emotion, or an imagined construction. Observing these patterns is not only useful in personal contexts but essential in negotiations, interviews, or even intimate relationships. Eyebrows, often underestimated, are a vast source of emotional information. A slight lift can signal surprise, skepticism, or sudden interest, depending on the context. When both eyebrows draw together, the person is likely experiencing confusion, anger, or mental effort. Even a single quick, involuntary movement can change the entire meaning of a facial expression. Learning to see these subtle cues is like discovering a hidden language written on the human face, a silent yet deeply eloquent idiom. The mouth, in turn, is not only the channel through which words emerge but also a constant indicator of emotional state. A genuine smile, also known as a Duchenne smile, involves the orbicular muscles around the eyes, producing the wrinkles known as crow's feet. A false smile, on the other hand, only engages the mouth and tends to look tighter and more symmetrical. Slightly drooping corners of the lips indicate sadness or discouragement, while pressed lips reflect emotional repression, restrained anger, or resistance. Biting the lips often denotes anxiety, uncertainty, or suppressed desire, and a single gesture of the mouth can speak louder than 1,000 carefully chosen words. The jaw also has its own language. A tense or clenched jaw may signal anger or frustration, especially when accompanied by a slight tilt of the face or a hardening of the gaze. When someone chews without food, it often means they are channeling stress or anxiety through their body. This muscular tension may seem insignificant at first glance, but it is a very clear signal for those trained to see the face as a constant unit of emotional expression. All of this proves that facial reading is not about isolated parts but about the dynamic interaction of its components. Beyond these conscious expressions, the face also reveals microexpressions, tiny, involuntary gestures that appear in less than half a second and betray an emotion someone is trying to conceal. These microexpressions may signal contempt, fear, joy, sadness, surprise, anger, or disgust. They are universal and appear even when a person attempts to maintain a neutral expression. For example, a single eyebrow twitch, a fleeting nose wrinkle, or a brief hardening of the gaze may be enough for the observer to sense what is truly happening within. Learning to detect microexpressions is one of the most powerful skills in the arsenal of nonverbal communication, because it grants access to emotional truth before it gets filtered through the rational barriers of language. However, it is not enough to recognize isolated expressions. Context is the ultimate judge of interpretation. A smile may mean complicity, sarcasm, or courtesy depending on the setting and the rest of the body. An averted gaze may indicate shyness, boredom, or cultural respect. That is why reading the face across different contexts requires refined situational sensitivity. In a job interview, a raised eyebrow might signal interest. In a couple's argument, it might suggest irony or emotional distance. In a negotiation, a rapid blink could indicate insecurity right before conceding an important condition. And in a casual conversation, a slight smile combined with narrowed eyes could be a sign of genuine affection. This is why it is essential that the observer not simply memorize patterns but develop a holistic perception. The face should never be analyzed as a set of isolated parts but as a symphony of signals working in unison. Each expression must be interpreted alongside tone of voice, body language, the person's emotional state, and the social context. Only then can one accurately decipher what the other truly feels, even if unspoken. And it is important to remember that while there are universal expressions, every face has its own unique way of communicating. Facial reading also deepens with prolonged observation. The more time we spend with a person, the more we learn their baseline, how their face looks in a neutral state. This reference is crucial for detecting any microchange. A slight lip press absent from their usual expression may carry great meaning. The same goes for pupil dilation, which often increases with interest, attraction, or excitement. The expert does not focus on grand gestures, but on the small shifts that break the face's habitual pattern. It is in these subtle alterations where the deepest keys of emotional communication lie. This level of observation, however, must not be used for manipulation but for understanding. The true purpose of reading the human face is to improve relationships, empathize more deeply, and anticipate emotional needs before they are expressed verbally. In professional settings, it enables more emotionally intelligent leadership. In personal ones, it allows for a far more genuine connection. And in all cases, it enables communication not only with words but with a sensitivity that few people possess. Ultimately, the human face is a map worth exploring. Learning to read it does not require magic but practice, attention, and the willingness to see beyond the obvious. When we manage to interpret the silent language written in muscles and expressions, we step into a new level of human communication. One where understanding flows without words, where emotions are no longer hidden, and where every interaction becomes an opportunity to connect from the most authentic part of the self. Because the face does not lie, you only have to learn how to listen to it. Chapter 10. How to detect personalities in minutes. Detecting a person's personality within minutes is not a gift reserved for experts nor an act of fortune-telling. It is a trainable skill based on precise observation, pattern interpretation, and fine-tuning your social radar. The secret lies in what you choose to observe and how you connect those data points in your mind. From the moment someone enters a room or crosses paths with you, they are already projecting hundreds of subtle signals that reveal who they really are. Your task is not to make an immediate judgment, but to consciously perceive what most people would overlook. Start with the initial scan. This moment happens when you see someone for the first time and your senses pick up on their overall energy, posture, walking pace, eye direction, and level of presence. The key here is not only to look but to register. How does that person enter the environment? With firm and decisive steps or hesitant and restrained ones? Do they look around or keep their eyes fixed on the ground? Does their body appear expanded or contracted? These small details allow you to form an initial hypothesis about their emotional state and personality type. In the first 30 seconds, there is more relevant information than in an entire forced conversation. People are more genuine when they are not yet aware of being observed. In that brief span, you can notice their dominant body style, whether they are more visual, kinesthetic, or auditory based on how they move their eyes, gesture, breathe, or position their hands. You can pick up on their level of self-image through how they dress, how they care about details, or how they move among others. You can also detect signs of dominance, passivity, anxiety, or calmness simply by observing their relationship with space and their spontaneous body language. A person who constantly touches their face while speaking is likely showing insecurity or emotional hypervigilance. Someone who stands with legs apart and hands on hips conveys control or an attempt to impose presence. Tone and volume of voice, even when the content is irrelevant, reveal much about self-perception and prevailing emotions. It's not about seeking isolated signals, but about connecting the whole picture as pieces of a puzzle. Now, overall attitude is also a clear thermometer of personality. Some people approach with an automatic smile but with no energy in their eyes. Others may seem expressionless at first, but within seconds their body begins to open up once they detect trust. Some systematically avoid eye contact, while others stare intensely as if trying to dominate the interaction from the start. All of this communicates. And the more you train, the faster you decode. The key is to remain present and free of prejudice. Don't try to immediately label someone as extroverted or insecure, but rather understand which signals predominate in them and what they emotionally need in order to function. That is the real reading. Because what you see is not just a set of movements, but the visible expression of an internal structure. Sharpen your social radar by understanding patterns. For example, if someone speaks quickly, moves their hands a lot, and maintains erratic eye contact, they are likely processing emotions quickly or trying to impress. If a person barely moves, speaks in a low tone, and holds eye contact firmly but distantly, you may be in front of someone analytical or a reflective introvert. But it's not enough to read just once. Constant practice is what turns these observations into refined intuition. And the best way to train is by exposing yourself to different types of people with the mindset of an active observer. Instead of judging, watch. Instead of assuming, confirm. Use everyday conversations as training grounds. Notice how a person reacts when the topic changes, when an emotional subject arises, or when they receive light criticism. Do they tense up? Do they open up? Do they avoid? An effective strategy is to use casual questions that trigger emotional or rational responses, and then observe which side of their personality is activated. Someone who responds with details and data probably has a more cerebral preference. Someone who answers with anecdotes and emotions usually has a more thoracic profile. If someone avoids answering, changes the subject, or responds with monosyllables, they may be protecting their emotional space or showing a more introverted or defensive trait. Even the way a person sits, how they position themselves in relation to you, whether they cross their legs, play with an object, or touch their neck, these micro-behaviors, when combined, reveal internal structures that often the person themselves does not recognize. As your sensitivity grows, you'll be able to anticipate reactions before they occur. You will see the beginning of discomfort before the person verbalizes it. You will sense if they are about to tell you what they really think or if they are holding back. This gives you a powerful advantage, not to manipulate, but to connect more authentically. Silent understanding creates an invisible bridge between people. When someone feels understood without having to explain everything, trust is born. And in that moment, you can truly influence, help, or simply build a meaningful connection. Reading people in minutes does not mean reading them superficially, but reading their essence with attention and respect. Training this social radar is like tuning an instrument. At first, you will fail, misinterpret some signals, or let yourself be carried away by stereotypes. But with time, patience, and practice, you will develop a skill very few possess. Deeply understanding others without them saying a single word. That is the true art of deciphering human behavior. Chapter 11. Behavior, Routine, and the Psychology of Action. Every person builds their personality not only through words, but also through daily actions, seemingly small decisions, and repeated routines. Observing these daily habits allows us to see beyond speeches, to penetrate the true mental structure of an individual, and to decipher motivations that even they may not fully understand. Punctuality, for example, is not just a logistical detail, but a clear sign of internal organization, respect for other people's time, and of how that person prioritizes their values. Someone who is consistently late is sending powerful nonverbal messages. Perhaps they feel anxious about committing, maybe they unconsciously resist structure, or they are expressing, without saying it, a subtle form of control over others. On the other hand, someone who arrives early or right on time often reflects foresight, self-control, and a need for order that may be driven by discipline or, in some cases, by fear of social judgment. Order or disorder also reveals much more than an aesthetic preference. A cluttered desk may indicate a creative mind in constant flow, but it may also reflect emotional chaos or mental distraction. Conversely, a meticulously tidy workspace can display mental structure, a need for control, or even obsessive traits. The key is not to pass judgment, but to recognize that every behavior is a symbolic expression of an internal structure. In the same way someone walks tells us more than it seems. Firm, long, and decisive steps often speak of confidence and clarity of direction, while a more restrained or erratic gait can reflect doubt, shyness, or latent anxiety. And when someone moves quickly but rigidly, they may be under internal pressure, striving to project control they do not actually feel. Voice and speech are also highly revealing. Some people accelerate their speech when nervous, while others slow down and modulate their tone to maintain an appearance of control. Volume, pitch, pauses, and filler words allow us to deduce emotional states, levels of self-esteem, confidence in what is being said, and even whether the message is truly felt or merely polished to please or persuade. The alignment between what is said and how one behaves is one of the strongest signals for identifying authenticity. For example, if someone expresses enthusiasm but keeps their arms crossed, wears a tense smile, and avoids eye contact, their body is betraying an emotion different from the one being verbalized. That incongruence is the gap through which we can access the true emotional state. When the body is aligned with the verbal message, the impact is authentic, credible, and resonant. But when contradictions arise, A trained observer perceives them and can use them as a starting point to understand insecurities, blockages, or defense mechanisms. It is also important to learn how to detect emotional patterns that emerge in moments of stress or avoidance. Some people under pressure tend to joke excessively, as an emotional escape mechanism. Others become hyperactive or evasive, trying to dodge a deep conversation through constant distractions. There are those who adopt a hyper-rational attitude, throwing out facts and arguments coldly in order to avoid connecting with the vulnerability of the moment. All of this is part of a psychological system that seeks to protect the ego, personal image, or internal balance. The key is not to judge these behaviors, but to interpret them as signals of what that person has learned in order to survive emotionally. Detecting these mechanisms allows us to generate empathy, communicate with greater emotional intelligence, and act with a more refined reading of social dynamics. The analysis of everyday behavior must be approached from an integral perspective. It is not about observing a single gesture or a single action, but about detecting repeated patterns. For example, someone who seems charming in social gatherings but treats service staff impatiently is revealing an unconscious hierarchy in their perception of human value. Another example. A person who always postpones the important while dealing with the urgent is probably governed by a reactive, not proactive, mind, something that may reflect insecurity, fear of failure, or a low level of focus. Detecting these tendencies is useful not only for understanding others, but also for refining our own behavior and identifying our own inconsistencies. Daily routine, in its apparent repetition, hides valuable signals. The type of content a person consumes, the accounts they follow on social media, the words they use most often in casual conversations, the way they react to the unexpected. Everything is a trace that allows us to reconstruct their mental map. The reaction to an interruption, the level of tolerance for frustration, the ability to listen attentively or to interrupt compulsively. All these elements are linked to emotional development, self-awareness, and inner stability. Ultimately, all behavior is communication. When we observe a person in action, we are not just seeing gestures. We are reading their story, their wounds, their inner triumphs, their unconscious learnings, and the ways in which they have developed strategies to move through the world. Learning to decipher these everyday codes is one of the most powerful skills you can cultivate. It does not require innate talent, but rather conscious attention, practice, and a deep human curiosity. It involves refining observation, stepping away from automatic judgment, expanding empathy, and developing a richer perception of human complexity. Because ultimately, people are not explained by labels, but by nuances. And those nuances are revealed in the everyday, in what we do when no one is watching, in how we walk through life, in how we respond to the small things. Whoever knows how to read this gains a real advantage in any interaction. Chapter 12. Analysis in Conversations and Social Contexts. Observation in social contexts is not limited to capturing the obvious, but rather to developing a reading ability that adapts to the environment, the moment, and the type of interaction. In a job interview, for example, tension is often present in both the interviewee and the interviewer. The former may display signs of anxiety through micro-gestures in the hands, stiffness in posture, or subtle self-touch movements, such as rubbing the fingers or touching the face. Meanwhile, the interviewer may show genuine interest with a slight forward lean of the torso, nod synchronized with what they are hearing, and steady eye contact. But if, on the contrary, the interviewer frequently interrupts, avoids eye contact, or maintains a closed posture with crossed arms and a reclined body, it may indicate judgment, haste, or disinterest. In these contexts, it is essential to adapt your observational radar without losing naturalness or appearing as though you are analyzing every gesture like an interrogator. The key is to maintain a soft, peripheral attention that allows you to register the coherence between what is said and what the body communicates simultaneously. In everyday conversations, whether in sales, teamwork, or social encounters, it is necessary to tune into the other person's emotional rhythm before making judgments or reacting. For example, if you are on a date and the other person smiles constantly but their body language shows tension in the shoulders, restless hands, and shallow breathing, they may be nervous or trying to hide insecurity. Instead of assuming everything is fine because of the smile, it is more effective to mirror your communication to ease the atmosphere. Use a calm voice, allow respectful pauses, and show genuine interest through a receptive presence. This not only reduces tension but also fosters more authentic communication. The biggest mistake in these contexts is wanting to impress or rushing to interpret without first creating connection. The most valuable interpretation does not come from observing like a judge, but from the empathy of an interlocutor who listens with the eyes, the ears, and a refined intuition. During a sale or negotiation, visual listening becomes a strategic advantage. Noticing how the other person reacts to certain words, how their posture shifts with different proposals, or how their facial expressions harden or soften gives you valuable clues to adjust your approach. If you mention price and notice the client raising an eyebrow, pursing their lips slightly, or leaning back, there may be doubt or resistance. If afterward you mention benefits and observe nodding, a relaxed face, and leaning forward, you are probably on the right track. But beyond interpreting, the true power lies in how you adjust your verbal and nonverbal language in real time. It is not about manipulation, but about communicating with awareness. Saying the right words without the right nonverbal alignment can generate distrust. On the other hand, when your gestures, tone, and presence align with your message, trust is built naturally. In work teams, observing behavior in meetings or group activities provides a clear map of internal dynamics. The one who dominates the room usually uses the space with authority, moving freely, speaking with confident pauses, and maintaining eye contact with everyone. In contrast, someone who feels sidelined tends to shrink into their seat, avoid direct gaze, or speak little. Identifying this allows you to detect informal leaders, unspoken tensions, tacit alliances, or members who need better integration. But again, the power lies in how you use what you observe. If you notice someone quiet and withdrawn, instead of labeling them indifferent, you could approach them afterward and create a one-on-one conversation that allows them to express themselves. Many times, behind silence lie valuable ideas waiting for a safe channel to emerge. Observation is about understanding beyond words. Visual active listening does not replace auditory listening, but it complements it powerfully. It involves looking without invading, perceiving without immediately reacting, and carefully registering what is not being said. For example, if during a discussion someone crosses their arms, avoids eye contact, and begins tapping their foot rapidly, they are likely defensive, even if they say, "Everything's fine." Here, intervening gently, validating what they feel without pressuring them to speak, and allowing space for expression can transform the dynamic. The essential point is to understand that gestures are not absolute truths, but doors that can open if given the right context. Often, body language is not meant to conceal, but to protect. And when someone feels understood without being invaded, that protection dissolves. Training this level of observation requires deliberate practice. It is not about memorizing lists of gestures, but about refining your sensitivity to context, congruence, and nuances. Each person is a universe, and although certain patterns are common, the most valuable skill is learning to read the emotional rhythm, the tension or relaxation conveyed by their body, and the subtle shift that occurs when they feel comfortable, heard, or seen. This is only achieved with presence, empathy, and a genuine desire to connect rather than judge. In conversation, what communicates most is not always what is said, but how it is said, and what the body echoes. Posture, tone, and the energy emitted are integral parts of the message. And those who know how to read this, and act on that reading with humanity, become powerful communicators. That is why every interaction is both an opportunity for analysis and for connection. Observing is not about becoming emotionally detached. It is about opening a deeper channel of understanding. Instead of merely responding with words, we can respond with a validating look, with a supportive gesture, or with a silence that listens more than 1,000 phrases. In social contexts, the value of what you observe lies in how you use it to improve the human flow between you and others. If you interpret a signal as weakness, you may react with judgment, but if you see it as a need, you will respond with empathy. This difference transforms relationships. Finally, using observation to communicate better means adjusting your language, your energy, and your intention. If you notice someone losing interest, don't force it. Change the focus, pause, involve them with a question. If someone seems insecure, don't confront them. Slow the pace, create a safe space. And if someone appears closed off, don't insist. Leave the door slightly open through your clarity and respect. Each person has their own timing, history, and way of expressing what they feel. And the sharper your social radar, the more you will know when to speak, when to remain silent, and when to simply be. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can offer someone is your full presence. The kind that observes with empathy, listens with the eyes, and communicates from the heart. Chapter 13. Ethical and practical applications of human analysis. Understanding people through deep observation carries great responsibility. It is not simply about acquiring a skill to decode others, but about developing an ethical capacity that allows us to connect more genuinely, with empathy and without falling into manipulation. The analysis of human behavior, when used with maturity and ethical awareness, becomes a powerful tool to improve relationships, communication, and leadership. However, the line between positive influence and manipulation can become blurry if we are not attentive to our intentions. That is why the first step in applying this skill in practice is to observe our own motivations. Ask yourself, are you trying to understand in order to improve the relationship, help, or make better decisions, or are you seeking to exercise control or personal gain at the expense of the other person? When we cultivate this ability from a foundation of understanding, respect, and empathy, its applications become valuable and authentic. In daily life, you can apply what you have learned about reading people to adapt your communication style, reduce misunderstandings, and foster more collaborative environments. For example, if you are leading a team and notice that someone displays closed body language, avoid direct confrontation and first try to build trust through open-ended questions and active listening. If, on a date, you detect an inconsistency between what someone says and how they express it, don't rush to judgment. Instead, maintain genuine curiosity to understand the emotional story behind it. Every behavior we observe in others is a signal emerging from a deeper network of experiences, beliefs, wounds, and aspirations. Another important aspect is knowing when to stop. Continuous, deep observation can become an obsession or a constant attempt to scan everyone you meet. This can interfere with your spontaneity and your ability to live in the present moment. It can also lead you to misinterpret behaviors if you lack sufficient context. The human mind seeks patterns and explanations, but not everything we see has a clear intention or a precise psychological origin. Sometimes what looks like disinterest is simply fatigue. What seems like insecurity may actually be respect. That is why an essential ethical rule in human behavior analysis is to avoid drawing definitive conclusions without validating them through experience. Observe, interpret, but keep your analysis open, flexible, and subject to revision. Additionally, every social context involves a different dynamic. In some cases, such as an interview or a negotiation, observation helps you make better decisions. In others, such as a conversation with a loved one, excessive analysis may create distance if it is not balanced with empathy. For this reason, observation should serve connection, not separation. The goal is to see with greater clarity, not to build barriers. You may notice microexpressions that reveal sadness in someone who says they are fine, and use that information not to point it out directly, but to open a deeper conversation with care. This is the difference between using observation to control and using it to understand. Cultivating empathy while observing is a skill that can be trained. It is not about suppressing your analytical capacity, but about complementing it with genuine emotional openness toward the other. When you train your inner eye to see beyond social masks, you must also train your heart not to judge too quickly. Quick judgment is a common trap for the novice observer. True mastery lies in observing without the need to label, understanding without the need to classify, accompanying without the need to correct. In this posture, observation becomes presence, being with the other in full attention, without the rush to intervene or the urge to be right. This skill can also help you prevent conflicts before they escalate, recognize signs of stress in someone you care about, or even anticipate group dynamics in workplace contexts. But again, the approach matters. It is not about using knowledge as a strategic advantage to always win, but as a tool to create spaces of mutual respect and understanding. In leadership contexts, for example, you can adjust your communication style according to your interlocutor's dominant personality. With an emotional type, you will use more effective validation. With a cerebral type, you will prioritize rational arguments. This flexibility is not manipulation. It is social intelligence. Let us remember that this ability to observe and understand can be trained, but it must also be humanized. After all, we are not analysis machines, but relational beings. And even if we recognize a micro-expression of contempt or an incongruence in body language, our responsibility is not to use it as a weapon, but as a compass. A compass that guides us toward deeper, more honest, and more meaningful interaction. To apply human analysis ethically is to understand that behind every gesture, word, or glance there is a human being who deserves dignity. What you see in others also lives within you. Your ability to observe others is, at its core, a mirror that teaches you to see yourself more clearly. That is why the development of this skill never truly ends. Every person you meet, every conversation you have, every situation you analyze is an opportunity to refine your understanding. Respect, humility, and the conscious intention to use this knowledge for good are the pillars that will sustain your growth. Observe attentively, interpret carefully, communicate with empathy. In this way, this ability will become more than just a technique. It will become a way of living more deeply connected to the human reality around you. Conclusion: your new skill. Seeing through the eyes of understanding. Seeing through the eyes of understanding is more than a skill. It is a way of living. Throughout this audiobook, you've been guided by a map that has taken you through the invisible corners of human behavior, the nuances of nonverbal communication, the postures that shout what words keep silent, and the gazes that reveal more than any conversation ever could. Together, we've walked the path of behavioral analysis, from its foundations to its deep and practical applications. You have learned to observe with new eyes, to detect subtle signals that once went unnoticed, and most importantly, to understand that behind every gesture lies a story, behind every expression an emotion, and behind every person, an inner structure waiting to be understood. This new way of perceiving others is not a trick to manipulate. It is a tool to connect. In a world saturated with stimuli, with empty conversations, with social masks, acquiring the ability to observe deeply turns you into a beacon of understanding amidst the noise. You've learned to distinguish between visual, auditory, kinesthetic, emotional, cerebral, controlling, or evasive personalities. You've learned to read microexpressions, interpret postures, and listen with your eyes. And this does not end here. This knowledge is not a full stop. It is a doorway to a new level of interpersonal awareness. Daily practice, in every interaction, in every meeting, in every shared space, is what transforms this learning into a silent mastery. You no longer see the same as before. Now you recognize patterns. Now you can adjust your communication. Now you know when to speak, when to stay silent, when to yield, and when to affirm with clarity through profound observation. Continuing to train this skill is simple when you make the world your laboratory and every conversation an opportunity. Observe without judgment, mentally note repetitive behaviors, and sharpen your social radar in different contexts. In a job interview, in a family gathering, on a date, in a negotiation, or even during a simple walk down the street. Look beyond verbal content and begin detecting the intention, the emotion, the energy behind the words. Every person you meet is a new open book. If you know how to read between the lines, if you learn to listen without interrupting, to look without invading, to understand without imposing. The true power of this skill does not lie in being right, but in building bridges. For the one who understands does not fight. The one who observes does not react impulsively. The one who interprets with empathy does not need to impose. And that is true strength. The strength of someone who deeply understands and acts with precision. Always remember the most important principle. Not everything you see is what it seems. Observation without understanding is shallow. But when you look through empathy, everything makes sense. You have learned that ethics is an inseparable part of human analysis. You are not here to classify people as objects, but to recognize that everyone carries a story shaping their gestures, fears, and reactions. This knowledge should make you more human, not colder. It should bring you closer to others, not place you above them. It is from this understanding that you can truly influence without manipulation, help without interference, and connect without judgment. Sometimes, the greatest gift we can give someone is simply to understand them, without correcting them, without criticizing them, just seeing them as they are, beyond their masks and defense mechanisms. And perhaps the real power lies there, in becoming someone who does not need to shout to be heard, nor force to connect. Someone who observes from silence, from calm, from a practical and profound wisdom cultivated every single day. You do not need to do great things to transform your social world. You only need to train your gaze, open your heart, and practice visual listening. This new skill, if you care for it, if you apply it responsibly, will become an unfair advantage in every area of your life. Personal relationships, leadership, sales, coaching, teaching, entrepreneurship. Because understanding people is not optional. It is essential. And so, we reach the closing. But in truth, this is not an ending. It is the beginning of a new way of living. More present, more conscious, more connected. Because from today onward, you will no longer be able to unsee what you now see. You will no longer settle for merely hearing words. You will know how to read what lies between pauses, in the tension of a jaw, in the direction of a gaze, in the rigidity of a posture, in the speed of a blink. And in that moment, you will have understood the deepest truth, that to observe with empathy is to love in silence. That to read others is not to invade, but to accompany. That to see through the eyes of understanding is both a privilege, a responsibility, and a blessing. Now it is your turn to use this gift, and to use it well. So, if this audiobook inspired you and you're ready to continue deepening your personal growth and inner transformation, I invite you to discover another revealing audiobook that will change the way you see the world, your decisions, and your potential. Click, and I'll see you there.